This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Mac and Jack Sports Show, the Saturday debate show. And I am filling in for the host, Mac. I am Jamie Pags, the Philly sports guy. I am here with Dr. Paul Seminger. He's like the Yankee guru of this station. And there's no Jack. He's on vacation. So no Mac, no Jack, just us. You get us to do the debate show this Saturday. How you doing, Paul?
Hey, Pags, I'm doing great. I just did the first ever Saturday morning Yankee show, my first here on Northeast Streaming Sports. That was on from 7 to 7:30, and it went great. I want to tell you that everybody I had on that show today agreed with me. It was amazing. Of course, I was the only one.
Hey, that's perfect. That's perfect, because sometimes it's easier to just have them just come right on and be like, "Yep, you're good," and even if it's just you.
Because it's just me. I thought I was great today.
Hey, that's beautiful. I do that Monday through Friday, and it surprises me how much I agree with myself. So it's especially talking about everything Philadelphia. And at least the Yankees did their part yesterday, and they won for you.
They did.
So it could have been a lot worse, because had they been playing the Mets, you might have been a little bit angry. Your guests might have all been angry.
Yes, the Yankees haven't really played great baseball in July. They've been about a 500 team, and they've lost both games against the Mets. They didn't do well against the Astros. And so, there are some flaws. There's some things around the Yankees that give a Yankee fan concern. But of course, the trade deadline's just a couple of days away. It's on Tuesday. And there is hope that the Yankees jump into the water deeply, not just Andrew Benintendi, but go out and get big-time players. So let's see what happens.
Well, and what do you feel about Benintendi?
I like Benintendi. I think he's a good ball player. I think he makes the Yankees better. He's a guy that doesn't strike out a lot. He's a guy that gets on base. He's a guy that can walk. He's a guy that can run. He can play pretty good defense. If he's the only guy they get, they were kind of getting that from Aaron Hicks the last couple of weeks anyway. And that's sort of Aaron Hicks's upside. I think Benintendi's a better player, but I'll be underwhelmed if that's the only move they make. I think they need another starting pitcher. And as I talked about on my show, and as I've written on my blog, start spreading the news a million times. If Juan Soto is out there and you're the New York Yankees, you have to get Juan Soto, period. Get him.
Yeah. What do you got to give up for that?
It doesn't even matter as far as I'm concerned. You're a Phillies fan. I don't know the Phillies as much as I know the Yankees, obviously, and the Mets. You see, but if we were to go to any magazine, a baseball magazine, any preseason thing, any Baseball America newspaper or whatever, and look at the top prospects of any year, 90% of those guys don't make it. 85% of those guys don't make it. So sometimes teams prospect hug, and I get it. You don't want to trade the farm. If Aaron Judge were available right now and I were the Yankees, instead of it being Juan Soto, I wouldn't trade the farm for Aaron Judge, as great as he is. Love Aaron Judge. This isn't a knock on Aaron Judge, but I wouldn't trade the farm for Aaron Judge. He's 30. But you're not trading the farm for a guy who's Juan Soto because he's 23. He is the future.
Right.
Anthony Volpe's the Yankees' best guy, right? Anthony Volpe, I believe, is 21 years old. When Juan Soto was 21, he was already in the major leagues, leading the National League in batting average, on-base percentage, slugging, and OPS. And that was only 2 years ago. It wasn't like it was 15 years ago. So, yeah, would I give up Anthony Volpe? Absolutely. Would I give up 4, 5, 20 of the Yankees' best guys for Juan Soto? Because he could almost make the argument that all those guys combined aren't going to be Juan Soto. Think about all the names you've heard with the Phillies over the years. Like, oh my God, I'm trying to think of the guy. Was his last name Jordan? In the late 80s. Oh my goodness.
Kevin Jordan.
Yes, and he was going to be so great. I remember in college buying like 5 million rookie cards. This guy was going to be the greatest Philly of the greatest player, power hitter. He was amazing. And what did he do? He did nothing. Craig Jeffries, Stan Jefferson, Blake Rutherford. I mean, when the Yankees got David Cone, Marty Jansen was the big guy they gave up, and it was the Yankees giving up 3 of their top pitching prospects for David Cone. None of those guys even made it. I mean, so I'm always of the belief that if, again, I wouldn't sell the farm for a guy who's 97 years old or even 30 years old, but a guy who's 23, who hits left-handed, who's got star power, who's walked more than he struck out over his entire career, which I think, according to something I heard on ESPN radio the other day, he's the only guy in Major League Baseball right now with at least 1,500 at-bats that's done that. Absolutely. Get him. And if someday you need a shortstop, if they get rid of Volpe, and then in 2 years you go, when Volpe is ready, you know what? We need a shortstop. The Yankees, they're not like a different team. The Brewers couldn't do this, but the Yankees can then just go out and get a shortstop who's going to be available by then.
And I agree, and I absolutely agree. Because I feel like this is one of the things that the Phillies do wrong, that they feel that their prospects are all blue chip, that they are going to they're going to set the world on fire. First off, the Phillies, they like to keep their guys in the farm system a little too long. They overcook them down there, in the lower levels before bringing them up. And I feel that when you start to deplete your chips, so to speak, other guys start to step up in their place. And those chips, your prospects, when you trade away your top prospects, you start to get new top prospects. Go figure. You know what I mean? Like, that's just how that works. Somebody's going to step up in that. Somebody's going to start playing better because now they have the opportunity, and they didn't have the opportunity before. And that's where I feel that some of these other teams like the A's and the Rays that trade off all these players, or they acquire all of these players, they have such a pool that when they start bringing them up, they do so well. But then underneath them, the guys start to step up because it releases the log jam where somebody isn't there in AAA for 3 years waiting to get up into the big leagues. So I kind of agree with you that, especially for like Juan Soto. But there's another name in the list, and we might as well go ahead and get started right on the debate. And especially because of the Yankees, I don't know that this other guy really fit the bill for the Yankees really well. But when you're talking about Juan Soto, would you rather have him or Ohtani on your team right now? And what would you make a trade, since they are both right now, both these teams, the Angels and the Nationals, are fielding trades and coming close to the trade deadline? Would you give up some of the farm or most of the farm for Ohtani in comparison to Soto? Or, as I think about it, I don't know that Ohtani is a New York kind of guy.
Well, yeah. So here's the thing about Ohtani. The Yankees could have had Ohtani a couple of years ago, right? Ohtani could have gone to any team. And Ohtani said, I don't want to play in New York. I want to play in California. He said, I don't want to play for the Yankees. I mean, that was the Yankees who made him an offer. They made all sorts of things. There was a packet or something of great stuff they sent to him. Every team was wooing him. And he said, I don't want to go there. So who's to say that he wants to be a Yankee? But all things being equal, let's pretend he does. Who's to say Juan Soto wants to be a Yankee? Here's one of my hot takes too. This, like, when I say this, people get really upset because, Aaron Judge is having such a great season. And he is, and we all love Aaron Judge. This isn't a knock on Aaron Judge. Aaron Judge is great. Sometimes you just have to keep saying that. But who's to say that Aaron Judge wants to be a Yankee next year? Maybe Aaron Judge is saying, I can't wait to get out of New York. Maybe he loves it. I don't know. Does anybody really know? Maybe Aaron Judge says, I want to go play for the San Francisco Giants. That's always been my dream. Or the LA Dodgers or whatever. Hey, in 1979 or 80, the Phillies got Pete Rose, right? Pete Rose isn't going to be a Cincinnati Red. He's a Cincinnati legend. He was the part of the big red machine. How could he go to the Phillies? Because people leave teams. It's happened forever, right? Especially once free agency comes around. So, hey, would I love Aaron Judge to stay a Yankee? Of course I would. Does that mean Aaron Judge wants to be a Yankee? I don't know. We're going to find out this winter, aren't we? But so who would I rather have, Ohtani or Soto? Do they both want to be Yankees? Would they want to be Yankees? Would they be great? Listen, how could you say no to Ohtani? He was the MVP last year. He is a singular player, a guy who's hitting and pitching at the same time and doing remarkably in both. He is an exceptional talent. He's a star. He's fun. He seems happy. My goodness, I'd love to have him. Juan Soto, similarly, great player, not a pitcher, obviously, so he doesn't give you that same dimension. But, Ohtani now is really just a pitcher / DH instead of when he first was signed, they thought he could be a pitcher / right fielder. The Yankees have a DH. They have a whole bunch of guys who they want to cycle through DH. Josh Donaldson and Aaron Judge sometimes, and Giancarlo Stanton when he's not hurt. Matt Carpenter now. Adding another DH to the team doesn't necessarily move the needle forward. When he pitches once a week, that moves the needle forward. The Yankees could certainly use him. But he's 27. He does have a little bit more of an injury history. And so if I had to pick, I know this is people say how could you say no to Ohtani? But if I had to pick, I'm going with the 23-year-old superstar, and I'd get Juan Soto. How about you?
So for the Phillies specifically, I mean, obviously Juan Soto creates solves a lot of problems for any lineup. I feel that especially right now, we don't have a true leadoff guy, and I would put him right in the leadoff spot. Even though he's not a true leadoff guy, I think he'd be better than Schwarber. And Schwarber's having a great season, very similar to Aaron Judge. And I wasn't real excited about Schwarber signing because I knew what he was. You were getting somebody who was a career 240 hitter, who had a couple of home runs last year, at some timely home runs last year, and I thought they overpaid for him. And luckily, he's proving me wrong this year, which is great. I'm happy that he's hitting home runs left and right, and 32 so far, which is more he's ever had. And obviously we still have a good third of the season left to go. Juan Soto solves a lot of those problems, though. Now all of a sudden you have Juan Soto who's getting on base a lot more frequently than anybody else, and now you got Schwarber behind him, who now hit those 32 home runs, where I think 18 of them have been solo shots. Now you got somebody on base, so it makes things a little bit different all the way around. Ohtani, again, Ohtani causes a different type of issue that right now, when Harper comes back, not knowing the status of his elbow, that he's going to probably have to go back into the DH role. So now you have a logjam at DH because you have Derek Hall, who has been filling in really well for Harper. I feel like he has taken the place of Harper. He's not hitting at 300, but he does hit long balls. He got his first triple ever, in the major leagues the other day. So he's doing what he's supposed to do, and we haven't had a chance to miss Harper in the process of this. However, when you got two guys already in the DH role that you could use, and you can only use him I guess you can't even use him in the DH. I mean, I guess you use him in the DH while he's pitching, but ultimately it's when he's not pitching, where are you putting him? He doesn't know how to play outfield. Can he play first base? I don't know anything about it like that. So it really would cause a big logjam in a lot of ways. But how do you turn down a guy who hits all those home runs and is a 2.5, 2.6 ERA right now? I mean, so with a 8 or 9 wins so far this season on a team that ain't doing so hot.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you'd have to really consider that. And I don't know. I would probably take more of a flyer. I don't know if the Phillies have the chips that they could use. But there again, as I think about it, I was like, I giving up these chips to get out there. They said when you give up your prospects and less than 0.001% ever become of the entire population ever become Major League Baseball players. And that includes everybody who's in the farm systems too. So although they have a more likely chance if you are part of a farm system, doesn't mean that you're going to get up there. And especially with the Phillies, they, like I said, they like to overcook their guys back in AAA and AA. They don't like to send these guys up to the big leagues because they feel like that their talent up at the big leagues is superior to what's down below. And I don't know that it really makes any sense that way. I feel like that they should bring up every center fielder that there's a possibility in our minor leagues to see if it would work up in the majors. But I'm not the one. That's why they don't pay me the big bucks to be these guys. So
Right.
personally, I would choose Juan Soto as well. I think that you have a lot more of an upside, but I think the problem is that you know, like the Yankees could give him $500 million and him try to be happy with that. Because that's really what it's going to take, since 440 million wasn't enough.
Yeah. So my thought is, if I were going to get Juan Soto, I'd ask for a negotiation window. And if I couldn't get that, I think I'd still do it because you're still going to have him for 2.5 years. And this year, he could be the guy that makes the big difference. I mean, you'd be substituting basically Joey Gallo or Aaron Hicks for Juan Soto. I mean, that just makes the Yankee lineup that much longer, that much deeper, that much greater, and that much more fun. But I think that what I would do is I'd say, hey, 15 years, 33.33 million a year. You know what that comes to? $500 million. How do you say no to that? And if he does, then you go, all right, fair enough. Like, I gave you a great offer. That's not being cheap. I'm giving you $500 million or something like that.
So, but
That's
I
just
look at
crazy.
things a little differently than that. Like, I'm not sure that I would go for 15 years. And I understand that players like the idea of the longevity. Oh, I'm going to be making all this money 15 years from now. 15 years from now, he's going to be, he's 23 now, so
He'll
he's
be
going to be
38.
38. So, is he really going to be that same player at 38? Is he going to
No.
be worth that money?
Mm-mm.
I look at it more like, I would much rather, you got him for 2.5 years. I'd sign him for $50 million for 5 years, with no opt outs. You don't get an opt out, no trades. I'm giving you this much money. You're with me for 8 years. Now let's figure it out after 8 years.
No, I love that idea. I don't
Quarter of a
see
billion
teams.
dollars is a lot.
I don't see teams doing that. We have a writer, Lincoln Mitchell, who suggested doing that for Bryce Harper a number of years ago. Just blow him out of the water with a ridiculous number on an annual basis, but make it short. I would do that in a minute. Absolutely. Um, the only reason I'd give a guy like Juan Soto that kind of number is because he's 23. He hasn't even entered his prime yet. So you're going to get most of those years are going to be great years. It's the same reason a guy like Aaron Judge, I wouldn't give a long-term big contract to. I know he's great. Yes, he's great. He's having a great year. We love Aaron Judge. But he's going to be 31 next year or so. He's entering, or he's going to be about to enter his decline years. So most of the years on the Aaron Judge contract are going to be decline years. Most of the years on a Juan Soto contract, at least the first 10, are going to be when he's in his prime. And if that's what it takes to get him, all right, I'm willing to bite the bullet on a guy like that. I would have been willing to bite the bullet on a guy like Bryce Harper because he became a free agent, I think, when he was 26 or 27. That made sense. Doesn't make sense to give big dollars to a guy who's already over 30. That's my thought on that.
I agree with that. And Alan, to answer your questions on whether a small market team right now could be in the mix for Soto. I feel, and or Otani. So I think not as much on Otani as far as Soto, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Miami Marlins made a play for Juan Soto. I think that that would do a couple of things. One, it would probably put a couple of fans in the stands, and any more than if they can get 5 more stands in that fan, that they're doing something really big down there because they don't have anybody going to watch those games. And ultimately, the fact that you have him for 2.5 years, he becomes a bargaining chip in a big, big way. And they have, again, the staff, and people underneath of them to, in the AAA and AA to be able to really send up the haul that it would take for to get him from Washington. My thought is that they're not going to re-sign him though. That you're only getting him for the 2.5 years, and at the end of that 2.5 years, you better make sure that that trade deadline in 3 years from now that you are putting him up there, or you're about to win a World Series. Those are the two things. I mean, because you have have some great pitching down there. At least you have the one guy who's doing amazing, and they do have a lot of people in their minor leagues that can come up because obviously you've been repleting, you've been uh, stockpiling that because you've been trading away players left and right. So I kind of feel that you should have a good minor league system right now. Ultimately, you should be able to field a pretty good team, and in 2 years' time, might even be able to compete for a World Series. I know in 3 years' time, you better make sure that you trade him away because you ain't going to sign him. And
I
Miami's
agree.
never going to be able to have that type of offer to do that, and then you just wind up losing it. And then I think about the other way about this, where and I've heard a little bit about this. Again, I don't know that Texas has the pieces in their farm system. Again, I feel that really, you know, the other way that I think about this is would you trade the two of them for each other? Would you trade
Mm.
Otani for Soto and go that route for a couple of years? Hopefully you get Strasburg back next year. I mean, Washington is only 3 years removed from the World Series. So, I mean, they do have a whole bunch of guys on that team that should have their rings still. I
Yeah,
don't
they're
know.
having a bad year this year, but you know what? We've seen a lot of teams go from worst to first. It's not as though they don't have a lot of talent on that team. And the prospect haul, what they're going to get back for Juan Soto, I don't think they would be trading Juan Soto. I think the Nationals would feel that they're closer than they maybe look to be in the standings if Juan Soto had been willing to sign that contract. I think the Nationals are saying, look, he's not going to stay with us for whatever reason, just like I've been talking about Aaron Judge. If you're a free agent, you have the right to go play where you want to play or chase the money, whatever you want to do. I mean, that's the system. So, people say, like, are you going to be mad if Aaron Judge becomes a Met? No. If he wants to go play for the Mets, let him be a Met. If he goes to the Phillies, let him be a Philly. Should the Yankees make a fair offer? Of course they should. He's a great Yankee. But should the Yankees blow him out of the water and offer him 10 years at $50 million or whatever, 10 years at even $35 million? I don't think I'd do. I know I wouldn't do that. So, these guys have the chance to play where they want to play. He doesn't want to play for the Nationals, at least at the price they offered. So he's going to go somewhere else. So they want to trade him. I think if Soto had signed, obviously they wanted to sign him. I think the Nationals would be thinking that they're a team that's going to be part of the race, not this year, obviously, but maybe next year, or the year after.
Well, again, they used to have great pitching. I mean, obviously the Scherzer's gone. You have Strasburg, who I mean, he's missing in action. I'm sure he's hurt again, and he goes back and forth. But obviously, those were big pieces on how they won. Soto doesn't even have a ring, right? He wasn't up there at that point, was he part of that team that won?
I don't know that. I'm going to look it up.
So I don't even think that he has the ring yet. So he wound up coming up out of nowhere to be here at 21. I mean, but that's what some things the Nationals are able to do. I mean, they did the same thing with Harper. Harper was playing in the major leagues at 19 years old. It's rare, very rare, when somebody has the ability to do that, when any player or athlete has the ability to be up in the major leagues on any level at that young of an age. You
Juan
see a
Soto was
lot
on
more
the
in
team.
hockey.
He was on the team.
Oh, so he does.
He
So he
played
does
7
have a ring.
games. Yep, in the World Series. Yep. In
There we
fact, he
go.
did pretty well. Hit .333 in the World Series. He was 9 for 27. Let's see if he hit any home runs. Looks like he hit 3 home runs. My goodness, get him in the Bronx. He's a postseason legend already. Come on.
Right. He's
Oh
the
my
new
goodness.
he's the
He
new
can do it in the
Mr. October.
postseason. Mr. October too. Somebody had said, I mentioned this on my show this morning, a commenter on our site. He's not a good defender. Okay. So I looked at his numbers, defense numbers, his D-WAR over the course of his career, the last 5 years. And I compared it with a whole bunch of other guys. Stan Musial, he had a negative D-WAR for most of his career. Ted Williams. I mean, I'm not going to get Stan Musial because his defense isn't quite great enough. But I compared Juan Soto's 5 years of his major league career to Reggie, who played 5 years as a Yankee. Juan Soto is much better defensively than Reggie ever was during his Yankees years. So, like, to say I wouldn't get Juan Soto is like saying I don't want Reggie when he was a great Yankee. Or, you know what? He could play, and he can hit real well, but I'd rather not have Ted Williams on our team, or Stan Musial, or even Bernie Williams had a negative D WAR on during those World Series years, and Paul O'Neill from like 93 to 97 or 98 or so. Not everybody's great defensively. Not everybody's a 5-tool player, but certain guys can hit and mash, and Juan Soto can hit and mash. So put him on the Yankees.
I have a question, because you keep saying that word, and I have no idea what it even is and how it's even calculated. What is a D WAR? What is a D WAR?
A D WAR. Now, I'm not a mathematician, so I would have to go to a website and read you the definition.
What does D WAR mean?
Yes. So WAR. We're gonna do the Paul Semendinger definition here. We're gonna make it real simple, because that's the way I understand it. WAR is a statistic that's called wins above replacement. And it's widely regarded as a standard when you're looking at baseball players to see who is the best. You look at how that player's numbers compared to if he wasn't in the lineup and there was just a replacement player. Now, these numbers get calculated based upon ballpark, the average players in the league at the time, et cetera. It's very complicated, and I wouldn't have any idea on how to figure that out. D WAR is looking at their defense in relationship to the typical player. So defensive wins above a replacement player. And so a guy like Juan Soto has a negative D WAR, which means that if you just took an average guy out of the minor leagues who plays right field and stuck him in right field, he would probably play better defensively than Juan Soto or Ted Williams or Reggie when he was a Yankee, et cetera, all those names I said before, because his numbers are negative based upon how a right fielder should be making catches and stuff. Now, all those defensive statistics, of course, are very hard to quantify. One of the things baseball's trying to do is figure out how to best judge players defensively, and it's an inexact science. But all that being said, this is what we use to judge players. D WAR isn't a perfect statistic, but it is a statistic that's widely recognized in baseball as a measure of a guy's defensive abilities. And the point I'm making is, yeah, he's a negative defensive player, but so was Reggie, so is Ted Williams, and those are guys I'd still want on my team.
I'd be willing to bet so are a lot of players.
Yeah, right.
That there are a tremendous amount of players. I got to imagine, going on that statistic alone, our whole outfield is negative. But the first thing that comes to my mind when we're talking about Juan Soto and how he's got a negative D WAR, does it take into consideration that he is on the team that he's playing against, and that the defensive wins against the replacement? Does that take into account that you got him batting and that he's going to actually help the win? Against whatever.
There's offensive WAR and there's defensive WAR, and then there's overall WAR.
Oh, okay. So that's really the overall WAR is maybe what it is
really
that I'm trying to talking about, because I got to imagine his overall WAR in comparison to his defensive WAR. He's got a really big positive offensive WAR, a somewhat small negative defensive WAR, that the overall WAR is probably in the positives pretty high.
Yeah, you want Ted Williams on your team. That's my point. You want
exactly.
Juan Soto on your team. You want Reggie on your team.
So, and this will be the only time I say this. I own 2 jerseys that are not Philadelphia jerseys. The first jersey I own is a Mean Joe Green jersey, because when I was a kid, I used to tell everybody that I was the kid in the Coke commercial. So I had a Mean Joe Green jersey. It was like I would show that around. Nobody even noticed the fact that it was a black jersey, and of course he had a white jersey that he threw to the kid. But nobody ever noticed that. I just kept saying that I was the kid. The other one is Reggie Jackson. So when you say, Reggie Jackson doing his best years as a Yankee, Mr. October, my birthday's in October. I feel like I'm Mr. October. So that's exactly the reason why I have a Reggie Jackson jersey in Yankee pinstripes. I ain't really excited about it, but that, you do what you got to do. You don't ever see me wearing it at all. So I did wear it one time. I got to go to, I think, the second attempt for Roger Clemens to get his 300th win against the Boston Red Sox, and he got beat. So That was the first
You know
time
what?
I
I'm
was
having
in.
a hard time hearing you. My internet's fading in and out. So
All right, better now, or at least hopefully better now.
hopefully.
There we go. So let's move on. Obviously, I'm done talking about Soto and Otani. I don't know that either one of them are going to be able to go and they get this done before the trade deadline. I feel that these are off-season trades that could possibly occur. So nobody's going to be able to get Soto right now unless they're giving up like their triple A team in total, for this. And I just don't see that happening. But, the trade deadline is looming. And with this third wild card team, it allows a number of different teams to possibly be in the mix on whether they are buyers or sellers. And it puts a different, perspective on these teams. Obviously, teams like the Nationals and the Reds, the Pirates are all going to be sellers. They're too far away from being able to get even close to the wild card spots. Same thing with like the A's, the Royals, and the Tigers, the Angels, even. Anybody who's under 10 games. But once you get above that number, like the Texas Rangers, they're 7 games out of a wild, or 7.5 games out of a wild card. To me, that tells me sell. But they may not think sell. They may think buy. And what's your opinion? Like, how far away do you feel a team should be to still be considered a buyer in this new wild card era?
I think that's a great question. And I think what you're saying is if you're more than 10 games out at this point of the wild card, that at this point you say it's over. What that would mean would be that, as you say, the Cubs, the Pirates, the Reds, and the Nationals in the National League are all more than 10 games behind in the wild card. And in the American League, it would be the Angels, the Tigers, the Royals, and the A's. And then you have like these cusp teams, like the White Sox are in it. They're only 3.5 games out, but the Rangers are 7.5. And in the National League, the Marlins are only 6 games out. You were saying that'd be a great place for Juan Soto. Could he make the difference of 6 games over the course of the rest of the season? Probably. And then you have the Diamondbacks who are 7.5 out, the Rockies who are 8.5 out. So I think it's somewhat of a complex question. Sometimes teams overperform and their record is better than it might be because of they're getting lucky breaks, they're getting good bounces, things just seem to be falling for them, or you have situations where you have players who are performing way above their expectation and you're winning. I think if I were a GM, I would have to be looking at all those things and saying, how realistic is this? Are we 7.5 games out because we're really good and we're underperforming? And maybe there's a piece that could help us make the difference? Or are we 7.5 games out because we're 7.5 games out and we're just a pretty mediocre team? Or are we 7.5 games out because we're playing way above our head and we shouldn't even be this good? I think those are the questions you have to ask. And those teams would then have to make those big decisions. But if you're out of it and you have something that can help you get good next year, I think that's when you have to start to think like maybe we ought to consider being sellers.
Well, and there's a couple of teams that fall into that mix. Obviously, the Marlins are one of those teams that I feel are playing a little bit better than they should be. And I think that has to do with their pitching. Cantara is a great pitcher. And when you have that guy every fifth day who's going to be able to come in and get the win, or at least hold the other team to 1 or 2 runs, you're going to win a lot of those games. I mean, I know in the early 80s, that's what Steve Carlton's MO was. Or even in the 70s, where he could pitch. He could pitch. I mean, they were only pitching every 4 days and 3 days back then. And he went 27-7 on a team that won 45 games just about. So, like, he won more than half of those games because he held the other guys to 1 and 2 run games. So if you score an average of 2.5 to 3 runs a game, you're going to win. That being said, I feel like that's what it does with the Marlins. But do they really have the pieces to be able to make this run possible? I look at the San Francisco Giants, who were 1 year removed from winning 110 games, but first round exit in the playoffs. And do they really have? They're only 4 games out of the wild card. Not playing very well right now. They're under 500 as we speak, but they're only 4 games out of this wild card spot. Do you take into consideration how well you played last year and the fact that you guys played over your heads last year and had 110 wins, even though you had a first round exit in the playoffs? In comparison, and say, okay, well, now this year we're underperforming a little bit, but maybe a trade, as he should be back here momentarily. Underperforming right now. He's coming right back on. There we are. Welcome back.
Yeah, little technical difficulty here. The
That's
computer shut down on me.
that's sometimes that happens. So, but like I said, they're underperforming this year in comparison to maybe overperforming last year. How much does that fall into the mix? If you're a GM for the Giants right now, is this something that you want to do? Do you want to try to be a buyer and try to ignite your team to be able to go better, and do better? Or do you feel like maybe that the losing streak that you're on right now is part of a bigger issue and might be time to replenish some of the coffers that were used up last year? That's, when I look at that for the Giants, I look at the Orioles in the same situation, and you're probably a little bit more in tune with the Orioles right now. Orioles are above 500 team, surprisingly enough. They are in the fourth right now in the AL East. They're 2 games out of the wild card. Are they buyers?
That would be such a tough decision to make. They're a team that I think is playing over their head, right? If I'm the Orioles, I'm 51-49. No one expected that. And, that's the other thing that I didn't mention before. I think if you're under 500 at this point, you're probably a mediocre team. If you're playing under 500 as August is dawning, if I'm a GM, I'm saying, like, this is not the team that except if it's the Orioles, that's really worth getting people excited about. Most teams that are at 500 at this point are saying, like the Red Sox, they're below the Orioles. It's a disappointing season. The only reason the Orioles are different is because nobody expected anything out of them, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, they got hot, and they're playing great baseball or very good baseball. They're competing against the good teams, and they're winning slightly more than they're losing. But my goodness, if I'm the Orioles, I am not a buyer because I don't think this is really their time yet. And that's such a difficult division with teams like the Rays and the Blue Jays and the Red Sox and the Yankees above them, even though the Red Sox are below them right now, that to think that you're going to be able to finish and defeat the best teams in the playoffs, I think, is a big wish and a big hope, and I don't think it's realistic. But at the same time, because they're doing so well and things seem to be coming together, I would also not be a seller. I think if I'm the Orioles, I just sort of let this thing ride out. I see how it goes. I see how these guys perform in the heat of August and over what could be a pennant race, and I use that as the basis for next year. But I'm definitely not selling. Like, the Yankees would love to have a guy like Cedric Mullins, their center fielder. I've been asking the Yankees to get him for years. I love that guy. But if I'm the Orioles, I'm not listening to any offers because I want to see how this all plays out.
Right. Well, or listening to offers, but I feel like the reason why the Orioles are winning is because they're doing things that not many other teams are doing. The hit and run is a play in baseball that is a lost art. And stolen bases, also a lost art. Both things they do well in Baltimore, or that they just do in general in Baltimore, and it's helping them win games. I mean, they just did have a series with the Yankees, and they did play pretty well. I think they lost the series, but the overall in the runs, I think that they tied in the runs. That they lost both games by 1 run, and they won their game by like 2 or 3 runs. So these were close games. They weren't out of it. It wasn't like in previous years where the Yankees just came down and just blew them away.
That's correct.
And I feel that the same thing with Tampa. that they are playing with these teams now. I mean, look at Seattle. Is Seattle playing over their head? Is it really have to go with this J-Rod kid who's coming in here and maybe got a new energy, and just his energy is igniting the rest of the team? I don't know anybody else on Seattle's team other than J-Rod, but yet they are, a half a game. They have a half a game lead in the wild card spot. They're half a game above.
And they just got Luis Castillo late last night.
That's a name that you guys were real itching for. I mean, I've heard every Yankee show that I've watched on the Northeast Streaming Sports Network that, and there's a lot of them. Trust me, I'm inundated with Yankees stories. But that Juan Castillo was going to be the guy the Yankees were going to get. And now he's in Seattle. So Seattle obviously is a buyer. They're saying, let's go after this.
They're a buyer. They're going for it. Yep.
Yeah, as they should, I think. I think that, they have to figure out how to beat Houston the same way the Yankees do. Everybody's still trying to catch up to Houston in terms of what happens when you're going up against them. Houston's not going to win every game, as you just learned when they got swept by the A's. So which made me, all that did was make me feel better about the Phillies getting swept by the Cubs. That sometimes you're just not into the game as much as you should be. And that's exactly what happened when, Houston played Oakland. It's just like, yeah, we're looking ahead. We just beat the Yankees a couple of games. We swept Seattle, and now we're going in there to a buzzsaw of Oakland. So I feel like the Oakland players are all playing to get traded. So they play a little bit better because, one, it's their World Series. So obviously there's going to be a lot more eyes on Oakland when they're playing Houston than when they're playing the Angels. So nobody cares about those games, where Houston, somebody's actually paying attention and watching, and probably more scouts are paying attention, because I feel Houston also could be buyers and sellers. That I feel that they have a lot of relief. They have a great bullpen that they could trade for a couple of bats. And I thought that Houston is actually a natural trade partner to the Phillies, with the tie being Ed Wade. I mean, Ed Wade literally built that World Series team because he's the one guy who's able to replenish, your lower leagues, the AAA and AA, and now all those guys are up in the major leagues now, and they're competing for World Series. They won a World Series, whether they cheated or not. We're banging trash cans, but ultimately they ain't taking that ring away from them.
No, they're not.
So it's like, okay, yeah, we cheated, woohoo! Everybody cheats. If you ain't cheating a little, you're cheating a lot, and it's a matter of whether you get caught or not. Again, baseball didn't want them, didn't want to announce it until after the fact. But neither here nor there. Do you see the Yankees? Obviously, the Yankees need to be buyers. What do you think is going to happen with them? I know that everybody loves, what's his name, Joey Gallo? Is that his name? Everybody loves him. They're so happy to have him on the team. It's, especially when you take out a guy, you have him pinch hit for a guy who went 2 for 3 that day. I got to imagine that everybody was really excited to see that move.
Yeah, no, that was a move people were very upset about, and they said, "See, that proves that Aaron Boone isn't the greatest manager ever." I have this sneaking suspicion, and Pags, if this happens, you can say, "Boy, Semendinger got it. This guy knows." I know I have no inside information. This is just, we're all fans and we're all just looking at things, trying to read the tea leaves and all this. And again, I mentioned this on the 7:00 show. But Andrew Benintendi comes to the Yankees, and the Yankees take Aaron Hicks and move him to center field, and they take Aaron Judge and move him out of center field. All right. Doesn't really make any sense, because Aaron Judge is probably the better center fielder right now. So why would the Yankees put Aaron Hicks in center field? Here's my crazy once in a million, like, if I'm right about this, it makes me seem like I'm brilliant. I don't think anybody wants Joey Gallo. I keep hearing some teams would be willing to take a chance on Joey Gallo. He has been terrible. I don't think the Yankees can get much for him. And if you can't get much for him, maybe he does serve a purpose as a defensive replacement, as a guy who could maybe come off the bench and maybe just magically hit one out. It doesn't seem to happen very often. He doesn't seem to put the bat on the ball, but does he have a good batting eye and does he walk a lot? Yeah. So does he have some very periphery value in some ways? Yes. And again, I don't think there's a team that's going to give the Yankees anything of value for him. But you know who they might give value for? Aaron Hicks. Is it possible that the Yankees put Hicks in center field the last couple of games and maybe the rest of this weekend heading into the trade deadline because they're trying to show the rest of the league that Aaron Hicks can still play some pretty good center field? Benintendi is basically a better version of Aaron Hicks. And maybe you say, this is a guy that we could actually get something for. I wouldn't be surprised, and no one's saying this but me, if the guy who moves is Aaron Hicks and not Joey Gallo.
I could see that. Again, because of what the Hall can come back. You want to try to get more. The trade for Benintendi, the Yankees didn't give up any pieces that they were putting together to try to get for Castillo.
That's correct.
Obviously, they didn't get Castillo. So now those pieces are now back in play for anybody else that they could go. And obviously, I agree with you. Nobody's going to take a real flyer on Gallo. And why would any team that you would want to be a trade partner with even want to take Gallo? They're going to want prospects. They don't want Gallo. They don't want the contract. That even though this is a final year of a contract, nobody wants to pay the money. So unless you're going to pay all that money, and even as an early pinch hitter, somebody who's going to pinch hit in maybe the 5th or 6th inning, because I wouldn't put him in anywhere of value. If you needed a sure hit in the 8th or 9th inning, Joey Gallo's not the guy I'm putting up at the plate. Although Boone might, because Boone is that type of manager. And again, you're feeling like maybe he just needs that one spark. He just needs to start to see the ball a little bit better.
He's had a long time to be seeing the ball, and he's not seeing it for whatever reason.
And if you are a competing team, do you think how much do you think that what's going on with Joey Gallo has to do with the fact that he's in New York?
Again, that's one of those things I don't think anyone can get into Joey Gallo's head and figure that out. Have there been players that have struggled in New York? Yes. Have there been players that struggle in New York when they first come to the Yankees? Absolutely. Do a lot of those guys turn it around? Yeah. In fact, a lot of great guys. Tino Martinez was terrible when he came to the Yankees. You could go down the list. Roger Clemens wasn't great when he came to the Yankees. There's something about coming to the Yankees that there seems to be, for some players, a transition. A-Rod wasn't great when he first came to the Yankees, as I recall. I don't think Giancarlo Stanton was great when he first came to the Yankees. Catfish Hunter wasn't great when he first came to the Yankees, on and on and on. I don't think Reggie was either. So there is a transition. The thing with Joey Gallo is he just never has been able to make that transition. Again, he is doing the one thing, and I don't want to overrate this at all, but he's walking. The only possible way that you could dream that something is going to turn around is the fact that he isn't just going up there and swinging at terrible pitches and missing them and looking terrible when he does it. He's striking out a lot because he's missing pitches that are good pitches that he's swinging through, and that's a problem. But he's still showing a lot of discipline at the plate and laying off pitchers' pitches. I mean, the fact that he's not hitting hitters' pitches is a bad thing, but there has to be something in there that says, like, he's not overwhelmed by the moment because he's showing that kind of patience. I would think if you were overwhelmed by the moment or overwhelmed by playing in New York, you'd be more jumpy. He doesn't seem to be that type of guy. He seems to be, maybe he's too cool. Maybe he's too calm and he doesn't feel the urgency because he's just not getting it done. But it's an interesting dynamic. I don't know why he's always been a big strikeout guy, but I don't know why he can't hit at all since he's come to the Yankees.
Well, and the first thing that goes through my head when somebody who could hit the ball before now all of a sudden can't hit the ball is, have you gotten your eyes checked? It sounds ridiculous, but maybe, just maybe, he needs contacts or glasses. And it sounds so funny because you just feel like, as I get older, and I'll say, hey, listen, I'm about to turn 50 years old. And
you don't look a day over 29, my friend.
Yeah, I tell you, it's the hair. So I
I
about
wear a
three
hat
feet.
because look,
Yeah, I
not much up
understand.
there.
You have the reverse mohawk going. So, but like as I, all the way up to about 45, 46 years old, I could see fine. It's as of recently that all of a sudden my sight started to go. Now, I'm a little bit later in this is than most people. I hear most people's vision starts to go around 40. The fact that I made it to 46 and it was like an overnight thing where all of a sudden I'm like, I can't see that. Why I can't I see that anymore? So, and as I mean, he's in his 30s, right? I mean, it's not like he's a young kid.
I think
Yeah,
20s, believe it or not.
is he? He's still that young.
I'm not sure. I'm going to tell you. You keep talking, and I'll look up Joey
Yeah.
Gallo.
So
I think he's 29.
it makes me wonder if it's there's two things that I think of when it comes to Jallo. One, that he's a better small market player. He can't deal with the pressure of being in a high market location. Dallas is a high market location. New York is a high market location. Even the LA, you can't go be at the Dodgers because that's you're being scrutinized there. But he
Joey
could
Gallo's 28 years old.
see now that's still young. I that makes
Yeah.
me think that he could still figure it out. But that makes me also believe even more so now that it's an eye problem. It's either an eye problem or a confidence problem. And that going to a market that may not have so much to, not always paying attention. I always thought that you could get lost in New York. That the problem with the Yankees is that everybody's talking about the Yankees, as we have like 18 shows on the Northeast Streaming Sports Network that talk about the Yankees. I know that I hear
Well, one
more
of them is the
Yankees talk.
best. One of them is the
Yeah,
best.
exactly. There can be only one. So start spreading the news is right on top of that list.
There we go.
But ultimately, that there is, that you can get lost in there, except on the Yankees. Like if you play for the Mets, you could probably get lost in the mix. You could, if you're the Giants or the Jets, unless you're the quarterback or whatever, you can get lost in the mix because there's so many sports teams in New York that you could focus on. The Yankees, you don't have that ability. So he might be better suited in a Baltimore or in a Washington, Kansas City, maybe even a Cleveland, where Cleveland supports their team no matter what. And Cleveland's actually in a little bit of a battle. Do you want to say, if you were Cleveland, do you want to say, hey, listen, we'll give you, one of our middle bullpen guys for Gallo to the Yankees? Somebody who's somewhere around like a high 3, maybe low 4 ERA for the bullpen. Bullpen is something that the Yankees could use a little bit of. Is I got to imagine that the Yankees are willing to take any type of flyer on Gallo right now at all. So they would say, hey, I want to get rid of Gallo. Yeah, you want to give me a 4.5 ERA middle relief who's guy has only pitched like 37 innings so far this season? Perfect. You know what I mean? I don't know. If I was the GM, if I was, it's Cashman, right? If I was Cashman, I would do it. You're not losing much, but I hear he's a great locker room guy.
That's what I'm saying.
So,
I feel bad. I feel bad for Joey Gallo. Sometimes guys come to a team and for whatever reason they're unlikable, right? I remember Carl Pavano came to the Yankees and he just seemed to be surly and he didn't seem to be fun and he was always hurt. There was always an excuse. Joey Gallo seems like a good guy. I mean, how do I know? I haven't hung out with Joey Gallo, but it seems like the players like him. You don't see a lot of articles or thing about like he's not a good guy. He seems to be trying. He's quirky. And you just know that he wishes he was doing better. And so sometimes a guy comes and he does poorly and you feel bad for him. I'll tell you a quick story. Like I think Yankee fans get a bad rap. I think Philly fans get a bad rap. A lot of these cities get bad raps because people boo and things like that. And the Yankees booed Mickey Mantle. The Phillies booed Santa Claus or whatever that was all about or something. Like it just gets silly. But I remember going to a game in the early 90s and the Yankees had a reserve infielder. He played a lot in a couple of those bad years named Mike Gallego. He'd come over from the A's. He was like a shortstop, second baseman guy. And he made this. This was a guy who's trying his hardest. He's a fringe major league player at that point in his career, 25th guy on a roster, whatever. But a scrappy guy, a guy who could get a hit, a guy who could play some defense. And he made an error late in the game, and the fans booed him. And I remember getting the Daily News or the Post the next day and reading it, and Mike Gallego going saying like, "My goodness, you booed me! Like I'm trying my hardest. You think I wanted to make an error?" And boy, I was in an impressionable age watching the Yankees, and I said, you know what? I'm never going to boo these guys ever again because they're trying their hardest. Nobody wants to go out there and play poorly. They're doing the best they can. So like Joey Gallo, I'm certain is trying the best he can. I wouldn't boo him. I actually feel sorry for him. I wish the results were better, and for him and for the Yankees. And I just hope if he's not a Yankee going forward, that he goes somewhere and he's successful. Same thing, like, we were saying earlier, would you be mad if Aaron Judge were a Met? No, if he goes to the Mets, let him do great for the Mets. Good for him. Like these people have lives. I don't hold any animosity towards a guy if he's not a Yankee anymore. And people say that like, oh, you're not a Yankee anymore. You went to the Red Sox, or you're not a Red Sox anymore. You went to the Yankees. Babe Ruth went from the Red Sox to, they sold him, but that's just silly stuff. Like you play the best for whatever team you're on, and you do your best for your teammates, and that's the way it is. For us to say I can't root for you anymore because you're wearing a different uniform or something like that, I just think it gets silly.
Well, I agree with that, and we're dealing with something very similar here in Philly right now with Castellanos. You know what I mean? He came over here this year. Uh, when he went to the Reds, there was a transition year where he needed to figure it out, and he's having the same type of problem right now with Philadelphia. And the Philadelphia faithful are booing him, that he's not having good at bats, and it starts to compound. I think about, and I go back to now a football reference here from the movie The Replacements. When Shane Falco talks about quicksand, and that this is a very similar situation, that you continue to go up, and you're trying to do your best. Obviously, he doesn't want to strike out. He doesn't want to pop up. He wants to be able to start to change those boos to cheers, and that I feel that when you are a good player, that although you may go through slumps, and some of those slumps could be long slumps, that eventually you come out of that slump. And that I'm not a boo guy. I don't boo, and I choose not to do that. Although I am one of the few from Philadelphia that aren't, that are not is not somebody who boos. And most of
that makes us
Philadelphia
the
will
same
boo.
because, like I say, I don't boo either. They're trying their best. My goodness, and I know myself. I don't perform better when people tell me I'm terrible.
Right.
You're
Right.
terrible. That's not going to make me better.
Well,
That's what I never understood. Like, oh, he's replacing Mattingly. Let's boo him. Like, well, Mattingly's gone. Now you have Tino, and he's struggling. Booing him is not going to make him hit the ball.
Exactly. That's exactly correct. But and then it gets out into the media. When you have a media member, Jim Salisbury, who is a great beat writer and what have you, and I think he feels like he just asked the question improperly. He's like, "So did you hear the boos? Coming out of there." Of course you heard the boos. Of course he hears it. He said as much. He's like, "Nah, man, I lost my hearing." You know what I mean? Now you're in a pissing contest with a writer. Because obviously the writer is trying to be a little bit, I don't think he was trying to be smart assy. I think he meant to ask, hey, listen, those boos are really loud now. How do you feel about that? What are you trying to do to maybe stop that from happening as much? Like I feel like that was really the question he was trying to ask. Didn't come out that way. And because it came out the way it did, it came across smart assy. And because it was that way, Castellanos got his back up. Then you have a little bit of a spat between a writer and a player, because ultimately, obviously, the player wants to do well. He doesn't want to have this conversation with a writer saying, "Yeah, I'm getting booed. I'm real happy about that." No,
Yeah,
of course
and the
they're not
writers
happy.
don't get booed, right? Like, and I have nothing against writers. I mean, we're all people. part of doing the same thing. You and I were talking sports, a writer's writing sports, the players playing sports. We all want to do our best. There's not a writer out there who's like, you know what? I think I'm going to drop a comma or write the wrong past participle in that article. And no, they're trying to write their best article they can. We're trying to do the best talk show we can. The players are trying to do the best they can. Nobody wants to be booed while they're working at their craft or trying to be their best. So, and it doesn't make you better. There's no way it makes you better.
Well, I agree. I feel that that once you get caught into that rut, that you get sometimes stuck in that rut, and that might be exactly where Joey Gallo is. And I feel that he's young enough right now that maybe a team that similar to, like I said, Cleveland, that could possibly use a good pinch hitter at a time. You know what I mean? That, maybe it's the change of scenery. Maybe it is that his eyes are starting to go a little bad and he needs glasses. You know what I mean? It could be any one of those things. I keep thinking back to when Pete Rose was on Fox the one day and he was talking to A-Rod and Frank Thomas. And they had the camera on, and it wasn't on screen. It was something off screen, but they showed it on social media where Pete Rose was talking about how when you are in a slump, your swing is what got you to the major leagues. So you move up, you move back, you move left, you move right in the box. Get yourself around in the box so that you could start to figure out what it was, because the swing was there before. That's what got you to the major league. You don't go changing your stance. Don't go changing your swing. Change where you're standing, and maybe that makes a difference. That the few inches of going forward or backwards might make the biggest difference in everything. If he's missing the ball, all of a sudden, if he takes 2 inch step backwards, now he's fouling the ball instead of missing and whiffing completely. So maybe then you take maybe 2 more inches backwards. I mean, these are the things that I think about. And I feel that hitting coaches right now don't emphasize enough. It's a shame that Pete Rose still isn't in the game of baseball, because I feel like that he would be invaluable to some of these hitters by just teaching them how to hit. I feel like that's one of the things Charlie Manuel does really well, even though he's not with the big club anymore. He's down at Double-A with Larry Boa. But I feel that they're teaching those guys how to hit better now in Double-A, so that when they go to Triple-A in the major leagues, they're more prepared for major league pitching in comparison to what we had down there before. That there's so much to learn from the old guys of baseball, that the new regime and the way that baseball is now, where everybody's trying to hit the 3-run home run and it's either, walk, strikeout, or home run. I don't like those. You know what I mean? That's why I thought Benintendi was a good trade for the Yankees, because he's not a power hitter. He might be able to hit some home runs, especially because they got that short porch over there. They got places in Yankee Stadium where you could hit a home run where it's not a home run in any other stadium. But so maybe he gets a couple more just for being there. But now this is a guy who played in Kansas City. Is the bright lights in New York going to bother him at all?
I don't think so, because he was on the Red Sox World Series team. He came up with the Red Sox and he played in Boston. And Boston is, I think, in many ways, just as tough of a city to play in as New York. I think any of these Northeast teams, right? These cities, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, these are not easy places to play if you're a ball player. The fans have high expectations. The fans want to win. The teams are big market teams. They go out and they get big time players, and the expectations are high. And when the expectations are high and the costs are high. So you know what? If you're a fan and you're going to the game, it's going to cost you a lot of money to go to the game. You're paying a lot of money for that hot dog. And I think when that happens, you start to say, like, hey, listen, if I'm paying $8 for a hot dog, I expect a product on the field to be worth this kind of money. And I think we see that with these, like I say, in Boston, Philadelphia, New York. None of these are easy places to play. So Benintendi did it in Boston, so I suspect he won't be wowed or overcome by the bright lights of Broadway.
Okay. So real quick, before we go to a break, I'm going to do a quick rundown, and let's see who should be buyers or sellers. Let's start in the National League. The San Francisco Giants, buy or sell?
All right, so let me just get the record up here. 49-51, 4 games out from the Giants. They were good last year. I'm buying, even though they're under 500. Go.
Marlins.
Yeah, I don't believe in the Marlins. 47-53, 6 games out. Yeah, I'm probably selling.
Okay. Diamondbacks.
They're even worse, and I'm trying to get whatever I can to build for the future. Selling.
Same thing with the Rockies, I would assume. 8.5
Yes,
games
sir.
out. They are, yeah. And I think, again, that might be another good spot for Gallo.
That would be a
Again,
great spot for Gallo, probably. You put the
Yeah.
ball in the air and it flies,
right,
right?
exactly. Now let's go to the American League. Obviously, I think Cleveland's a buyer.
Yes, they're only a game and a half out.
The Orioles,
I made my point. If I were them, I would do neither. I wouldn't buy or sell. I would just ride this out, see what I have.
stand pat. Red Sox.
It's interesting because they have some guys like Bogarts and Devers whose contracts are coming up soon in a year or so or whatever. And there's talk that they're not going to be back with the Red Sox. I mean, the Red Sox they've underperformed this year. Does that mean they can't turn it around? I don't think. If I'm the Red Sox, I'm always a buyer. You're the Red Sox. You're a big team. If you can do something to shift this thing, you're only 3.5 games out. Anything can happen in the playoffs. Yeah, I'm buying.
Is it a big failure if they fall behind the Orioles and ends behind the Orioles?
I don't think so. The Red Sox have done that a couple times. They finished in last place. Next thing you know, they win the World Series the next year.
Okay, so it's not as big a deal. I just know in Boston, the Red Sox are looked at higher than the Patriots, even though the Patriots were the better franchise in most cases. And last we'll leave is a Chicago White Sox.
That's a great one, too. 3.5 games out. I think they have a lot of talent. I think they've underperformed. So if I'm the White Sox, I think I'm buying.
And I'll throw in the Rangers. I think that they're sellers, but realistically, you're in Dallas again. Same type of situation. You want to play with the big boys. You gotta be buyers all the time. So, do you think that
And they've
they're buying or
underperformed.
selling?
They brought a bunch of guys in, right? They made a lot of big splashes in the offseason with some big time signings, and they're 45-54.
Well, and
Yeah,
I feel like
you
that
got to
takes a
buy,
while.
but because you're in it, you're all in. But boy, oh boy, what a disappointment. So I'm a buyer if I'm the Rangers, but I don't think they're really going anywhere.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And I feel like that, you know, again, I'm a firm believer. A team that drinks together wins together. And if they ain't drinking together, if they haven't gotten that team camaraderie yet, in the outside of the dugout, you know what I mean? They have to be able to like each other outside of the, in the real world. And I feel like that plays a lot into how some of these teams gel or not. I feel that that's what's happening with the Orioles right now, that they like hanging around each other, and that builds that camaraderie, builds winning. Same thing up in Seattle. I feel that J-Rod has brought some energy there. Everybody's excited to be there. Now you got Juan Castillo that's going to be there now too. All of a sudden, they are feeling like winners instead of feeling like that they're in Seattle and they play in rain all the time. So it's like the dreariness of Detroit and Seattle sometimes gets to you. The sunniest day in Detroit looks like it's overcast. And that's hard to live with every day. So if you're not having a good time being there, you start to get miserable. You start to lose. Losing begets more losing. It's the opposite way. If you're happy to be there and you're winning games, winning begets winning. So I kind of feel that that's where, again, Seattle has worked out. But in some cases, I think it's going the opposite way in Texas, that maybe these guys don't like each other so much. That being said, we're a little bit late for our break, so let's go do a quick commercial break. We'll be back in a few minutes, and we'll go for the second half of the Saturday Debate Show with the Mac and Jack Show. We'll be back in just a few moments.
The Hometown Foundation is excited to bring back the Dream Ride experience, August 26th to the 28th at Connecticut's Farmington Polo Club. Join us in celebrating the accomplishments of our Dream Riders while enjoying live music, a car and motorcycle show, family fun zone, pet adoptions, canine demonstrations, the Fireman's Chili Cook-Off, and much, much more. Get your tickets today.
And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
you
Okay,
gotta
go
get
ahead.
me at the random. I'm not prepared.
What a wonderful world. They're really saying I love you. What a wonderful.
I mean, you can see right now without LeBron, Lakers are struggling.
Let me tell you about a team I hate, all right? I know the Dallas Cowboy fan is here, so I had to make sure he knew how much I hate this team.
ready.
I've often said that the people who run baseball, they try very hard to ruin it.
I'm from Brooklyn. I don't have a problem saying it to his face. Oh, I'm from Brooklyn. Hey, get us any.
And we are back. Welcome back to the Mac and Jack Saturday Debate Show. I'm Jamie Paggs here with writer Dr. Paul Seminger. Doc, why don't you talk a little bit about your book? I know last week that you were doing a book signing in Baltimore. Mention your book a little bit.
Oh, you're awesome. All right. So the book, The Least Among Them, is the story getting great reviews. It's really a big hit. It's the story of the 29 guys who played for the Yankees as the only experience in their entire major league career. So these are the 29 guys whose one game in the major leagues occurred with the Yankees. But I don't just talk about them. I use their stories to tell other stories about the Yankees and baseball, where the seventh inning stretch came from. Did Babe Ruth call his shot? Who's missing from Monument Park? Who are the greatest two sports, football, baseball players in Yankees history? All sorts of great stories. Tommy John surgery, the story of El Duque, on and on and on. And, it's a great book. Yeah, last Saturday, a week ago today, I was in Baltimore. I did this show from our hotel room for a little while. And then I went over to the Babe Ruth Museum, gave a talk, got to meet a lot of people, gave autographs and that kind of stuff. So, when you write a book and it gets good reviews, people start to sometimes treat you like you're a celebrity, at least a small time celebrity or whatever. And it's kind of fun. Somebody asked me the other day, like, how do you know when you're an author? There's a couple ways. The best thing, the thing that I always dreamed of happening, and it has happened, is when you walk into Barnes and Noble and you find your book on the shelf. So I did do that. I have seen it on the shelf, and should I admit this? I will admit that I took the book off the shelf, secretly autographed it, and put it back on the shelf. So whoever got the book got a free Paul Semendinger autographed copy. So I thought that was kind of fun. I hear there's other authors.
Did you
that
put a
do
little
that,
note on that and saying, this one's a freebie? Here, you got this autograph for free.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, thank you for
Kind
buying
of
the
fun.
book.
But actually, I could. The other thing, somebody asked me about this. He's like, have you ever been somewhere just in random and seen somebody reading your book? That hasn't happened yet. He's like, you ever been on the bus? Somebody on the bus or the train reading your book? Well, here's the thing. I don't commute by bus or train. So I haven't even been on a bus or train. So I can't see anybody reading it that way. But boy, that will be a dream when that happens. That's very fun. So
and Rick is asking, where would the book be available?
Oh, Rick,
Sort of
thank you.
Barnes
It's
and Nobles.
everywhere. It's called The Least Among Them. If you go into Amazon, it's there. If you go onto Barnes and Noble, it's there. If you go onto my website, Start Spreading the News, there's a link where you just click on the book title and the book cover right there. It'll bring you right to the Amazon page. It's also like it's published through an independent press, Artemisia Publishing out of New Mexico. They are great, by the way. For any prospective writers, if you want to find a great publisher, traditional publisher, who really does it the right way, Artemisia Publishing is phenomenal. But sometimes people like to go to some of the independent sites like Forward Indies and things like that. It's available everywhere. Thank you, Rick, though, for asking, and I hope you get it, and I hope you love it.
So, and the only question I happen to have, and I'm listening to all of that, and it sounds like the book is great and everything. Why is the Babe Ruth Museum in Baltimore?
That's a great question, because it's actually the Babe Ruth Birthplace Museum. And the Babe grew up and was born in Baltimore, and that's where he became a baseball player, going to St. Mary's Industrial School. You know, he was what they would call an incorrigible as a youth. And his family, you know, they owned a tavern or whatever. I don't know that they were able to spend a whole lot of time with Babe when he was a little kid, and there were stories. This is actually going to tie into something we're going to talk about later, like the next 30-30. Stories of the way Babe Ruth grew up, and he was on the street at 5 years old, and this, that, and the other thing. And again, like I said, I think the word back then was incorrigible. And so Babe Ruth spent a lot of his time like at the St. Mary's home, which was a place where you took kids who weren't doing well at home and tried to get him an education. It was there that he learned how to play baseball, and the rest, of course, is history.
There you go. So even back then, people had ADHD. So I feel much better now that I have something in common with Babe Ruth, because they probably didn't know how to diagnose it back then, because they called me incorrigible as well, because I couldn't stop moving. I was somebody who had to learn with my hands and not necessarily in a book. And it sounds like he was very similar in that regard. So, all right, interesting stuff. I didn't know that he was born in Baltimore. So you learn something new every day. And the fact that he had ADHD makes me feel even more into it.
I don't know if we knew that he did, but okay.
I'm calling it that. It might have been anything else, but it sounds to me like ADHD. You know, especially now that I've had it, and also my kids have had it. So I understand what it's like and how tough incorrigible could be on an adult who's trying to just be a good parent. So let's get back to the questions and the debates. And this is probably a good one that we could spend a good 10, 15 minutes on really quickly. Umpiring this year has been challenging, to say the least. I mean, obviously, the biggest one this year was when Kyle Schwarber told Angel Hernandez exactly how he felt about the strike zone, how it's up here and it's over here and it's over here, and ain't nothing making any sense with anything going on. And again, Ortiz was being the umpire the other day when Wheeler was pitching, and it looked to me like Wheeler struck this one guy out 3 times in the same at bat. All 3 were called balls, and it just was like, is it, with umpires in total missing the calls? And I'm not saying on the base pass, but I'm definitely talking about the way pitches are being thrown and that they are just missing calls terribly. Is this going to speed up the process for the automatic strike zone to be used?
Yeah, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of the automatic strike zone, but I think you're going to start to see that. You know, a couple of weeks ago, I have my old notes here. It was either for the show that didn't quite premiere yet, the Yankee show, or it was for the debate show. It might have been last week with us or a couple weeks ago with Mac and Jack. But there was a statistic that 58 balls this year have been called strikes on Aaron Judge that weren't strikes. And I only saw it on Twitter or somewhere else, but I have to assume that whatever that statistic is, because then I saw it repeated other places, but I don't know how accurate that is, but I have to assume it's somewhat accurate, because as a Yankee fan, you see this all the time. He keeps getting called on pitches that are below the knees, that are low, that are out of the strike zone, and he gets rung up on them. And that's been happening since he got in the league. Now, when it happened when he first came up, you say, all right, he's a different type of ball player. He's bigger or whatever. The umpires have to adjust. But he's been around for 5-6 years now. And if the umpires are still trying to adjust, that's a problem. So I think, and there's all sorts of statistics where if you're ahead in the count, your batting average is always going to be better. If you're behind in the count, your batting average is always going to be worse. Pitchers know this and hitters know this. Each approach things differently when there's 2 strikes or whatever. And if you're constantly getting strikes called on you that aren't strikes, you're being put at a competitive disadvantage. And if it's a star, but really any player, your team's then being put at a competitive disadvantage. And look, everybody's going to miss pitches. I think, I still play baseball. I pitch for 2 different teams. And there are times when the umpires miss pitches. Like, I get it. It's all good. I never get mad at the umpire. We're just like we were talking about before, like we're all just going out there trying to do the best they can. I'm not Cy Young. I'm just some middle-aged guy trying to get guys out as best I can. So if the ball is close, I'm just hoping and praying that the umpire says strike. It's one fewer pitch I have to throw and one more guy closer to getting out. But in the major leagues, they have to be able to call these things correctly. And when you're seeing egregious things of guys throwing strikes and they're being called balls, or balls that are definitely out of the strike zone being called strikes, and it happens frequently, then you have to say that it's a problem. And baseball then, because of the technology, is going to be forced to address that problem. You can't pretend it's not happening if it's happening. That's one of the things. Back in the day, we didn't watch every game. There weren't games televised every game. We could talk about that later too, because now again they're not, because they're on all these streaming services. But so maybe the problem was the same with the umpires when Mickey Mantle was playing and when Ted Williams was playing and when Babe Ruth was playing. But you only saw 1 game a week or 2 games a week. Even when I was growing up, the Yankees were on PIX, Channel 11. They weren't televised every game. So maybe you see a bad call made, but then in your mind, you're assuming that all the other calls are fair calls and good calls. When you're seeing every single inning of every single pitch and every single game, then you're saying, like, they missed it again. They missed it again. And then there's social media where there's guys who have these sites where they talk about how many pitches were missed and what an umpire's accuracy is. And because that's out there and it's so prevalent, I think it becomes something that if it's a problem, and it seems to be, that baseball has to address it. And how are they going to address it? I think they're going to address it with an automatic strike zone.
So here's a statistic that's pretty alarming in the grand scheme of things, is that this was done by True Media, that umpires made in 2020, umpires made 11,644 incorrect calls on balls and strikes. Now, that's in 2020. It's 11,000 pitches. That's an awful amount. That's a tremendous amount of pitches. You have to imagine that there was, in the grand scheme of things, that there was over 100,000 pitches throughout the course of the season for everybody.
I think Rick makes a good point here. He just put it up for you.
There we go. Yes, I agree. It definitely makes it a lot more challenging, especially because we see it a certain way. Now, I feel that if the ball touches the box in any way, shape, or form, that it is a strike. Like, even if it's like the ball is like when you see the box and it's right at the edge of the box and it's almost like it's just a hair inside and they call it a strike, I feel like that's strike. But
so if it's just right here, that's a strike, right?
Right. If it's even a little bit more outside where you're not seeing much of it at all, that's still a strike as far as I'm concerned, because it's in the zone. It's when the ball is so far out. When you look at, the ball that Angel Hernandez called a strike to ring up Schwarber was so far out of the zone. And then you looked at his entire body of work for that game, and he missed so many balls and strikes that it was absolutely ridiculous. That it's just like, why? How is it that he doesn't get fined or, forced not to be able to call? Yeah, obviously the teams, they switch around, so everybody gets to umpire. Everybody's got to be behind the plate. You're not on a team, and you every 4th day you get to umpire, and that's how that works, because they like to keep the teams together all the time. So ultimately, in another 4 days, Angel Hernandez was going to be calling another game, and hopefully he was going to be better than the last one. And I'm sure he probably got a little bit of a scalding, saying, "Hey, you really had a bad game here, this game specifically." But the one thing that the umpires do in baseball that doesn't happen in any other sport except maybe hockey. Hockey, you could send somebody into the penalty box, but you're not kicking them out of the game. And in baseball, umpires have the ability to boot somebody from the game. So you're upset with somebody, you're frustrated with the way that they're calling balls and strikes. You mention it to them, and they get their back up, and next thing you know, you're out of the game, and he feels vilified or justified because now he doesn't have to listen to you anymore. And the truth of the matter is that that's the only time that an umpire can actually affect a game more than any other sport. And I mean, this has been the call for, what's that one umpire who always, the one thing I hear is that he's always that he's the star of the show, and everybody else, it's he's like the one guy who's everybody says the exact same thing, but he's been umpiring for a long time. But he's quick to pull a trigger on kicking somebody out, and it's always his show and not somebody else's. I think his name is Joe. I want to say Joe Buck, but I know that he's the writer. It's
Joe West.
Joe West. Joe West. He's always controversial in this part because when he wants to have a bad day, he has a bad day, and then he doesn't care who's the one that's going to complain about it because he has a quick hook. He's quick to throw you out and then the spotlight's on him. This is my show. I'll call it the way balls and strikes, the way I want to call them, not the way that you think I should call them. And then ultimately you start to get an attitude with a player, and then you start calling strikes, when they aren't strikes. You start, enlarging the strike zone for them. Because really, an umpire could call an enlarged strike zone for every player if he wanted to. They minimize it. It's from belt to knees, really. And realistically, it's supposed to be up at the letters. It's supposed to be from nipples to knees. So ultimately, if you want to call that high strike, you could, and you could legally get away with it without any issue. But I feel that if they do go to the mechanical strike zone, which I believe is probably going to get here a lot sooner than later, because this is a gambling situation. They're gambling more on baseball than they ever have before. And now, because of that, you don't want the human error to be part of this. You want to be able to say, okay, that's a strike, that's a ball, and it's always a strike, and it's always a ball. But you have to enlarge the strike zone then. At that point, you have to bring it back to the nipples to knees and allow the pitchers the ability to do it from there and make these hitters that are getting paid millions upon millions of dollars to adjust that way. I don't think you need to adjust that. Like I said, when it comes to these rule changes, we're going to ban the shift. No, you don't ban the shift. These guys are getting paid millions of dollars to be able to hit the ball. Have them learn how to hit the ball the opposite way. That's what you teach in the minors. That's what you teach in Little League and in these travel leagues. Hey, hit the ball everywhere on the field. Wouldn't matter. You couldn't shift on Tony Gwynn. Tony Gwynn could hit the ball wherever he wanted to. And it didn't matter who was pitching and how he's pitching. He barely had 1,000 strikeouts throughout his career, and he played for 16 years, 15 years? These players are coddled some. And it's tiring to hear. I feel like that the umpires have been bad, really bad this year. Their calls on the bases have been much better. They've actually been around 99.5% on the calls. There's only been that 0.5% where they haven't been able to challenge where, that call's been bad. And really, I feel that that's changed ever since that perfect game was miscalled. That one perfect game where the guy called him safe and he knew he called it. It was like he knew it was a bad call after he did it, but he couldn't change it.
Yeah, they didn't have replay yet. I think that spurred the replay too. Absolutely.
That's exactly what it was. That's what I feel spurred replay. So I feel that the automatic strike zone is probably going to come. Yeah, I expect that it's going to be here next year, that they have been practicing with this in, the minor leagues. I just don't know how what's the umpire then going to do when he has that? How are they going to call the balls and strikes? And
they're working on it. I haven't seen it in action, but I think they still. I'm not sure. Stand there and Make the call that way. It'll be interesting to see. I'm not a big fan of it. Again, I want them to get the calls right. And when the call goes against your player on the team you're rooting for, you get mad. You're like, they got to get it right. Listen, here's my rule. When I'm pitching, I want them to call everything I throw a strike. And when I'm batting, I want them to call everything I'm throwing a ball if I don't swing. So, and
Right.
I think Rick Sherlock makes a great point there too. They want consistency. And part of the problem is that you're not getting it. And look, if I know I'm getting the low outside strike, I'm going to be aiming to get the ball there and hoping the umpire keeps calling it. And the frustrating thing is if you're getting that pitch all game and then all of a sudden they call it a ball, you're like, everyone I've been throwing, there's a strike. How is that not a strike now? That's when you don't know what you're doing. And then you just sort of, you're on a wing and a prayer. So.
Right. And you start to get frustrated with the umpire. It's like, okay, you throw that one pitch, it's a strike. The next time it's a ball. And it's like, well, why is this a ball and this a strike? And then they could say, well, the batter was higher or lower, or like he was shorter or what have you. There's so many different things that umpire could use as the excuse. And then, like I said, have that happen 2 or 3 times. And you start to mess with the head of a pitcher who some cases, like these pitchers are that they're kind of divas a little bit as well, that they have egos. They are meant to strike these guys out. That's what they're trying to do. And, where Scherzer, I feel like Scherzer probably gets some calls sometimes. You know what I mean?
Well, that's actually something that drives me crazy. You're bringing that up. Is if it's a strike, it's a strike, and if it's a ball, it's a ball. And sometimes what they do, and you hear them say that, well, it's Scherzer, so on that pitch, they're going to give that call to Scherzer, not the rookie. Well, if it's a ball, it's a ball. I don't care if it's me batting against Scherzer or me throwing to Aaron Judge. If I throw a strike and he doesn't swing, that just because he's Aaron Judge and I'm silly old me doesn't mean that it's not a strike. It's a strike. The selective enforcement of rules or calls drives me crazy. Well, Wade Boggs doesn't swing at a pitch out of the strike zone, so that had to be a ball. Well, no, maybe it was a strike. He just didn't swing that time.
Right. Right. And I agree. I feel that sometimes that the umpires are calling what they think instead of what they see. And that's where you start to, because really an umpire can make anybody a great pitcher. And that's like, and it makes me wonder a little bit when it comes to like perfect games. When an umpire is in the middle of calling perfect game for a pitcher, and at what point does it start to wane on him a little bit about calling balls and strikes? It looked close. It's got to be a strike now. It's like that's, slightly out of the zone where you just barely don't see the ball in the box. And it was close enough. And it's like, okay, it's, I'm going to call it a strike because, obviously this guy's pitching a perfect game and I want to try to continue it. Or you don't like the pitcher and you're trying to do everything you can to go the opposite way. He's pitching a perfect game. He don't deserve the perfect game. That's a ball, and it's in that halfway in and out of the zone. So it's like I get nervous about stuff like that where, especially now, you're affecting the way the game is run. And I feel that there's too many umpires that are doing that and knowing that they're doing that. And it starts to become, you're supposed to be unbiased on the base pass, but everybody's got bias. You like some players, you don't like other players. You don't like managers, you do like managers. So that's where I kind of feel that, that attitude starts to get into the mix here a little bit. And that's why I'd be more happy about going to the automatic strike zone. However, I want that strike zone back to the original where it's supposed to be from letters to knees. And it's a little bit more enlarged. It goes over the entire plate and we get to see it. And if it goes through the strike zone anywhere in that box, because that's a 3D box, it's not 2-dimensional, where it's not like we see it on a screen. When they show the 3D version, it's got to go through the strike zone. So yes, there are some curveballs that go through the strike zone. If it goes through the strike zone, then you got to call a strike. And that's where I kind of feel that that's going to happen because, like I said, gambling is taking control of most of these sports now, and they got to take out the human error. And there's too much human error from these umpires.
Well, that's a whole nother topic, not on our list today, but maybe for next week. The infusion of gambling and all these sites and parlay bets, pitch by pitch, and all that kind of stuff. I'll just say that it doesn't thrill me at all. I think it leaves room for corruption and all sorts of problems. But we'll save that for another day. I want to give a quick shout out to this guy Crux, who he's a Mets fan, but unlike others, I actually respect the Yanks. Crux, I'm going to say the same thing back to you. I'm a Yankees fan, but I respect the Mets, and I'm rooting for the Mets, except when they play the Yankees, because I think your manager is the greatest guy ever. I'm a big Buck Showalter fan. So a mutual Yankee-Met coming together here on the Mac and Jack Debate Show. What do you think of that, Pags?
I hate it. I hate the Mets. I hate the Yankees. I don't like either one of those teams. And I'm a history. I like history. I like sports history. So I give respect to the Yankees in terms of the fact that you have 27 championships. You don't win 27 championships without, having great players throughout. Joe DiMaggio is, I feel like out of everybody, Joe DiMaggio is like the one guy who's not spoken about enough. That he had that 56 game hitting streak is quite possibly never going to be broken. That may be one of those ones that stands until 2050. It could stand for 100 years. That and the 191 RBIs. Both of those will never get broken. I feel like that's quite possibly that they will stand forever, especially nowadays.
You're mentioning the fact that we don't know as much about Joe DiMaggio maybe as we could, and what a perfect segue. Right now on ESPN is the series on Derek Jeter. We've done a lot of Yankee talk, so we don't have to necessarily talk about that, but it brings up the question. There's a Brady show. I've started watching that with my son, who's a big Brady fan. It's fantastic. I think we're only on episode 4 or whatever. There was the Michael Jordan, which I didn't see. Of course, I'm a Yankee guy, so I've seen all the Jeter episodes so far. But those are 3 big-time sports heroes. You got Jeter, you got MJ, you got Tom Brady. And now it opens up the question, Pags. Which other sports legends would you like to see them do this type of treatment for?
So, when we talked about asking this question, I started to think about it really hardcore. And I'm a big fan of certain players. Would love a 30 for 30 on Mario Lemieux. I hated Pittsburgh growing up. The Penguins have always been a hated team. The Flyers and the Penguins have always been contentious with each other. They came into the league right around the same time. The Flyers owned the Penguins for such a long time. Lately, the Penguins have kind of owned the Flyers, getting back into where history starts to write itself a little bit. But ultimately, I think that his story, he was such a great player. And, even the way that his contracts worked out, that he wound up having to buy the team or own the team because they couldn't pay him anymore, and that he went through cancer and then beat cancer and was able to get back out onto the ice, and that during a time when there was Wayne Gretzky and Mark Messier and all those types of players that, were a part of the Edmonton crew and all that stuff, that you had Mario Lemieux, who single-handedly won a couple of Stanley Cups for Pittsburgh. And that's one that kind of sticks out to me, that I would love to hear the behind-the-scenes portion of his story as just the first person that comes to my mind when I think about this.
That's a great guy. It's funny that I also started making a list of guys who play hockey. Now, for the record, I don't know anything about hockey. I've never, can I admit this, ever watched a full NHL game. It's not something I've ever done. I don't have an interest, or maybe I just haven't watched the game and I sort of have an interest. So when we were talking about making a list of players you'd like to watch a thing about, I thought of 2 of the great names in hockey history, Gordie Howe and Bobby Orr. They're actually the first people I even thought of on out of any list. And then when you and I talked, I thought of Messier and Gretzky. You know what? If there was a really good documentary about some of these great players like Claude Lemieux, like you were saying, or Mario Lemieux. I don't even know the difference. Which one?
Oh, you mentioned the name Claude Lemieux. Claude Lemieux, as I absolutely hated. I absolutely hated Claude Lemieux. I tell you, and I could. There was a couple of ex-Flyers that one specifically, Ed Hospodar, that if I ever had the chance to interview him, that's going to be the first thing I says. What goes through your mind when I mention the name Claude Lemieux? And I
Wow.
hated him. I hated Claude Lemieux. I was never a fan. That guy could all he did was win Stanley Cups. He
Now,
literally won
is
3
he
Stanley
brothers
Cups.
of Mario Lemieux?
No,
Just different
no, they're
names.
not related at all. And
Interesting.
he was one of those instigators. Just somebody. He was a hate the face, a guy that got under your skin. He was just an all around. You know, if he was on your team, he was a fantastic teammate to have. But if he wasn't on your team, like I said, that was part of the fight in 1987, where the Flyers came out and because he liked to score the goal after the practice, and the Flyers were there, and then they came in and had a huge fight before the game even started. Everybody wind up with 5-minute and 10-minute misconducts because of fights that happened before the puck got even dropped.
Wow.
So that's when I think of Claude
So what
Lemieux.
you're doing right there is you're creating interest, and what I'm saying is exactly that. Like if there was a really good documentary, it's got to be a guy you've heard of. So obviously Lemieux is a name, Messier, Gretzky, Bobby Orr, Gordie Howe from the olden days. That might be something that a person like me who's never watched hockey says, that sounds like something I'd be interested in. I don't know a whole lot about it, but I've heard that name. Yeah, let me see what it's about. And if you do that and it's done well, then that same person might go, you know what, that was kind of fun. I didn't really understand the sport, didn't really follow it, but that guy played for the Pittsburgh Penguins, or that guy played for the New York Rangers or the Philadelphia Flyers. I think I'm going to watch their game tonight. And all of a sudden, that's how you build a fan base. So if there was an opportunity to learn about some of these hockey players, it might, probably not. I'm very busy and I'm doing other stuff, but it might make me at least a little bit more interested in hockey. And it would definitely do that for other people who might have more of an inclination to watch. So those are my hockey names. Do you have any basketball names?
When it comes to basketball, I mean, you've heard a lot about things that this guy's done, but I'd love to see a full 30 for 30 on Wilt Chamberlain. I
Great
would
idea. It's
love
like the
to
Bobby
see.
Orr. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to see. I mean, how true was the 20,000 number? You know, how like there's not any footage or very little footage of the 100-point game, and somebody wrote 100 on a piece of paper, and he holds it up like this, and that's an iconic picture. Like, I'd love to know the guy who wrote the 100. Like, I want to know about that a little bit. I want to. There's so many different things. He was like he was a big judo at taekwondo. Like, he was like a black belt in karate. He was a professional volleyball player for a long time. Nobody knows about that. Like, he grew up in Overbrook, Philadelphia. He was the first one to leave a city to go to a different college. That was really what started recruiting. Like, that kind of began because of him. They stopped doing, you had to actually shoot the foul shot instead of, because he could literally lean back and jump and dunk the ball. And that was considered a good foul shot for a while. They had to change that rule. So there was so many different things that came about as rule changes because of Wilt Chamberlain, where he was throwing foul shots underhand because he couldn't really shoot the ball. I mean, the fights with Bill Russell, and I'm not talking actual fist fights or anything like that, but just the battles that he had, where Russell kept winning all these championships because he actually had a team around him and a really good coach, and it was Wilt kind of doing everything by himself and didn't have the shooters or anything around him to do that. So that would be a great 30 for 30 for me.
That's a great one. The guy I thought of in basketball is Dr. J. There's a guy that when people talk about great basketball players, they don't really ever mention Dr. J. But I remember as a kid growing up, he was like a superhero. In fact, I think Converse had cartoons with him or advertisements with him as a superhero, as I recall. I don't really know anything about Julius Erving. I know he played for the Nets. He played from Philadelphia too, so he gets both of our areas. But again, I'm not a big basketball guy. Watching a thing about Dr. J or Bill Russell or Wilt Chamberlain, that just might draw you in. So those are some pretty good names.
Yeah, and I trust me, I have lots of memories about Dr. J. Obviously, being about to turn 50 in the 80s was all Sixers. I mean, in 1980. And I feel like that this would be a great 30 for 30 because it's really the only time Boston tried to mimic it a little bit. But in 1980 was the first time one city went to 4 consecutive championship games. So that, the Phillies, the Flyers, the Sixers, and the Eagles all went to the championship game in their respective sports. We only won one that year with the Phillies, but, the Sixers lost to they lost to the Lakers that year, and the Eagles lost to the Raiders, and the Flyers lost to the Islanders in the great non-call by Leon Stickle, the offsides call by Leon Stickle. That would make a great 30 for 30 as far as I'm concerned, where you're seeing the city as a whole dealing with that. Similar to Boston, when Boston was on their run of championships, how does a Boston fan, not necessarily a specific player, but how is a Boston fan growing up during that time, being a young kid during that time where you're seeing championship after championship after championship, and every team just seems to be winning, and how you like, okay, now that you're losing, do you feel like you don't care because you've already won all your championships, or do you just expect to see these championships all the time? And I feel like that would make for a good 30 for 30.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. You look at cities. I mean, Pittsburgh had that in '79 with the Pirates and the Steelers. All right, here's a little off topic. I was a big Yankee fan, of course, but in 1980, the team I was rooting for in the playoffs in the National League and then in the World Series was the Phillies, who was my favorite member of the 1980 World Champion Philadelphia Philly team.
Who was it?
Who do you think I rooted for the most? Yeah, this just for fun. There was a guy on that team who was one of my favorite players of a couple of them I actually really loved, but one guy in particular, one of my favorite players of all time. Who was he?
I would say that the first names that come to mind are Mike Schmidt or Pete Rose.
Correct, and I liked them both. I rooted for them, and Pete Rose catching that pop up out of Bob Boone's glove and all that. That was awesome. But nope, neither of them. That's not the guy.
No, but I think of Greg Luzinski.
Luzinski, I loved the ball, but it's not him. I'll give you a hint. He didn't play in the field. He didn't hit.
He didn't hit.
He was a pitcher.
So I mean, obviously there was Carlton,
right.
Reed.
Ron Reed. I remember having his baseball card. He always had a card where he's like always stretched out with his arm, like and stuff like that. But nope, not Ron Reed.
I'm trying to think. Tug McGraw.
That's the guy. Oh my goodness, I love Tug McGraw, and he banging his hand on his leg and stuff like that. That was just awesome. When he got, I think it was Willie Wilson out to end the World Series. There was nothing better than that. I mean, when you're 12 years old and you just love baseball, I think for those few moments, I probably loved the Phillies and Tug McGraw and all that as much as I loved the Yankees. That went away real quickly, but for those moments, that was just pure classic wonder. Watching Tug McGraw pitching in those playoff and World Series games, he was great. Loved him.
And like I said, I remember that vividly. Like I remember being really close. We had a party at our house. My mother then took us out to, and it was really me because my younger brothers were way too young. I was 8 years old, and the street that was close to us, the big, McDade Boulevard, which is a 4-lane, street, was mobbed with people, and we're driving back and forth and doing our thing, and just everybody high-fiving, drinking, and going crazy. And it was just such a memory for me in terms of everybody being excited about the fact that we just won a championship after being so close for so long. I mean, the Astros were a thorn in our side, kind of like they are with the Yankees right now, on a consistent basis, which is what brought Pete Rose to that team. And I think of Tug McGraw was brought in, and interestingly enough, I worked at a dealership where I would, we would lease Jeeps to Tug McGraw. He was a friend to the owner, so I was kind of selling Tug McGraw some cars on occasion back in the day.
Very cool. Very
So
cool.
I got to meet him and his son, who is a country star. You know what I mean? And singing country music. I was a little integral in introducing to his wife, Faith Hill. So
Really?
I used to work backstage at the Spectrum, and Faith wanted to go out in the city, and I said, I don't know much about country, but I do have a friend, or I do know of somebody who knows a little bit about country, and kind of gave him a call and said, hey, why don't you come down to the Spectrum? Because she wants to go out into the city. And they went out in the city, and, I don't know what happened because I was still working. But, but that kind of thing actually happens. You know what I mean? And it's just, you never know what you're doing and stuff like that. But I've been around, even when I sold cars, I sold John Chaney one of his last cars before he passed away, which was
Amazing.
A small little Chrysler Crossfire. He was one of the first ones to own that. He's like 6'6", 6'7", trying to slip into that little car. It was amazing that he was able to fit in there. But
that's great.
Those types of things actually happen. And even when I worked backstage at the Spectrum, I was always meeting people all the time. I threw Reba McEntire's 40th birthday party. So just things like that are kind of interesting. When I tell those types of stories, they're like, you work backstage at the Spectrum? Yeah, I just got out of the service, and I was part of the union, in Philadelphia, because Philly's a big union town, and even the waiters, the bus boys, and, backstage people all were part of the union. So I got a pretty good gig being a veteran.
Yeah, that's great. Well, and thank you for serving our country. That's so important. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate your appreciation. So, but the one big ESPN, going back to what we're talking about with the documentary, I feel that one that really needs to get spoken about and really should go in depth and probably could be a full season, like a real documentary, not like a 30 for 30, would be baseball's going from the strike to the steroid era to now how we feel about those players that have taken steroids after the fact, and how they're being snubbed by the Hall of Fame. I feel in a lot of ways that the strike, everybody hated baseball at that point, and that they needed something to happen in the process of this, and baseball chose to turn a blind eye to the steroid era. And because of that, everything that occurred after that, these players, Mark McGwire, Sosa, Bonds, all of them who, were part of this era and were great players beforehand, now are being snubbed because of this, because the writers are all high and mighty. And I feel like it is the writer's situation. It's a media situation, not necessarily the player or the Hall of Fame itself. And I feel that would make a great documentary.
I think that'd be a phenomenal documentary. Listen, my kids were little when all this was happening, and I remember, I think one of the hardest things for me was finding out that, Mark McGwire was cheating a couple of weeks before. My son had just bought this Mark McGwire set of cards at the baseball card store. I'm trying to make my kids into big baseball fans and collecting cards with them. And then how do you explain to a little kid like, oh, this guy you're really rooting for really isn't doing it the right way? He's cheating, but we're not going to be cheaters and things like that. It was very hard for me trying to instill those values. I think I did. But there comes a certain point in a kid's life where a player is a hero, a superhero, larger than life. And then when you realize that they're just flawed human beings like the rest of us, everything changes a little bit. So, baseball did seem to turn a blind eye to a lot of the abuses that were happening. And because of that, then players obviously used and they did things that they probably, or they definitely shouldn't have done, but then it impacted their statistics. It impacted the statistics of the league. And now that their careers are over, and I understand the point, like we don't want to let cheaters in the Hall of Fame, just sort of like what I was talking about. But then at the same time, they've let in managers who put those guys in the lineup. And those managers are in the Hall of Fame, and they might not have won those games if they didn't have the guys who had steroids in the lineup to win the game. So how is it right that the players who performed can't be in the Hall of Fame, but the managers who manage them, and of course, Bud Selig's in the Hall of Fame. So how do you let the guy who oversaw the disaster in the Hall of Fame and then hold the players to a different standard? So that kind of thing has always bothered me. I think it's going to work itself out over time. And again, that's a bigger debate than the last, 2 or 3 or 4 minutes that we have.
Gotcha. I'm looking at this question. I'm like, that's a next week question. That is
which guys go in and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I do think that it's selective enforcement. Big Papi just got in. I think there were talks, or he failed the test. I don't have the facts, but these are the whispers around, or you read them online and stories like that. So I guess for some guys, well, Andy Pettitte did it once, so it shouldn't count as much as this guy did it 7 times or whatever, things like that. Baseball has to come to grips with this somehow. Like, let them in or don't let them in, but they've already let some in, or they've let ancillary people like managers and the commissioner in. So it becomes it's somewhat messy, obviously.
Understood. Well, just like when I think about Sammy Sosa, when after the following year he hit that home run and he hit the ball and he had a quartz bat, and that they then X-rayed the bat that they had in the Hall of Fame, and they said, okay, well, it's not corked. What do you think Major League Baseball was going to say whether it was corked or not? I mean, I don't think that they were even going to say it if it was. So obviously it was just those types of things have occurred throughout time. There's always been, we could never know if, Babe Ruth had his bats corked. Nobody would ever say anything about it. And the truth of the matter is that nobody should even care, because ultimately it was that home run race. And I remember vividly, I still have newspapers from that race, specifically from McGwire and Sosa. I know when he came to Philadelphia that day, there was the first time, it was early in the season. And I said all day long, Mark McGwire is going to hit me a home run ball. He's going to hit me a home run ball, hit me a home run ball. He hit a home run so far. I had my glove. There was only me and the 2 people that I was out in the outfield section because the Phillies weren't that good. And he hit this home run. I was going back for the ball. It hit off of the concrete wall between the 300 level and the 400 level at the vet, and bounced on the chair that I was sitting on and skidded all the way across the field. Now, that story in itself is, okay, I missed the ball because I went back and thought I was going to track the ball down really well. Truth of the matter is that it got memorialized in the newspaper because somebody took a picture, and you see me yelling an explicit word that I can't say on this channel right now, with my glove out like this, watching the ball hit on the seat I was sitting in. So you want to talk about manifesting, something to happen. I literally could have caught the ball if I just stayed where I was, but me thinking that I could track down a ball from Mark McGwire. But it was literally that home run and those home runs, because he had 3 home runs that day. The newspaper said Godzilla 3 because that was the big movie coming out right then and there. And the home run race between him and Sosa that brought people back to baseball. It was must-see television. ESPN would stop programming and show Mark McGwire every at-bat. And that's not something that they could do right now. There's nobody who has that type of panache in baseball that the world stops. Everybody stopped to watch. And that is something that, for that reason alone, he should be in the Hall of Fame.
Amazing stuff. Pax, I think we did it. We were wondering if we had 2 hours worth of, we didn't even get to all our topics.
Yeah, I feel like I knew that we were going to be good because I think it's going to be the two of us again next week. So we're going to have a lot more to talk about, starting with Rick's question. I think that that's a perfect question to lead into because I actually have some strong opinions about that too. I feel that I'll delete
Don't
a
give
little
it away.
caveat. Yeah, I was
Don't
going to say a little caveat to that. My personal opinion is that they're waiting for Pete to die. So that's he's going to be a posthumous, unfortunately. But it doesn't look like that only the good die young, and Pete's going to live forever. So, but that being said, everybody, thank you for staying with us for this 2 hours. It was great to have you guys. Paul, thank you so much for being on the show with
Jamie,
me.
it's great.
And we'll be back here next week to do another Saturday debate show. In the meantime, everybody have a great weekend, and we'll see you guys next week.